Hi, everybody. It's Meteorologist Joe Cioffi on this Friday as we take a look at all the things that are going on with respect to the tropics, because they seem to be going into overdrive here with respect to the number of systems and the potential impacts to land areas and so on. So both in the short and the long range. But let's start right off with Jose. And I think from what we can see with respect to the weather models that we looked at overnight, and this morning, that if you are from the Delmarva Peninsula northward to up the New Jersey coast, across Long Island, coastal Connecticut, coastal Rhode Island, and southeastern Massachusetts up to about Cape Cod, I think you need to start paying closer attention to all this. I don't know how this is all going to play out in terms of what we're dealing with, strength-wise, track-wise. There are just a number of possibilities, including the possibility that he could do some sort of strange loop. It also includes the fact that it could wind up taking a track going out to sea. There are a number of ways this could play out. The one thing I want to emphasize, however, is that we are at the very least, and this is a good thing, at the very least, we are not sitting here with a Category 3 or Category 4 hurricane sitting in the Bahamas right now with an arrow pointing up the East Coast. Okay, we have Jose as a strong tropical storm that has gotten a little bit better organized and is likely to retain hurricane status at some point, perhaps later today. But I just don't see this, evolving into some, large-scale hurricane down the road. There's only going to be a limited amount of time for it to strengthen. Conditions for strengthening are not exactly ideal. So it's going to just do whatever it's going to do. And then, of course, we have the fact that it is going to be eventually getting up north of 35 degrees north. The water temperatures there are colder. If it's not moving at a rapid rate of speed, it is going to probably start to weaken when it moves into that area between 35 north and 40 to 41 degrees north and out to about 70 degrees west, that sort of box area of the latitude longitude that sits east of New Jersey and south of Long Island. So, if it gets into that position, we're likely to see this begin a weakening process, and that's going to impact whatever we wind up have happening. We've got a new moon next Wednesday, so that's something we need to remember for coastal residents. So where it is on the coast and what kind of wind is produced is going to make a difference with respect to tides, assuming that we have something more than a very close call. So I think you just kind of need to pay attention to all that's going to be going on. Meanwhile, when we look at the satellite, the visible satellite this morning, Jose actually looks like it's gotten a bit healthier. There's some banding going on. Looks like the center is tucked in underneath the main area of convection. Maybe a little bit of shear, but not a whole lot. And the outflow looks like it has gotten a bit healthier. So would not be surprised if this thing winds up strengthening back up to a hurricane strength before too long. So let's jump around. I'm going to show you the Jose forecast tracks with respect to the weather models. And the hurricane track models overnight take it just offshore, okay? And in fact, one of them does sort of a strange loop, but the overnight hurricane track models actually between the two runs from the overnight has actually shifted a little bit slightly to the east, but they are close. All right. Now we're also going to take a look at a few other models with respect to this, and I want to we're going to go to the GFS first. And for those of you who weren't around last night, we are going to go back and do the overnight run and show you what it did, which was, I actually was pretty amazed after seeing it, because it was not what I necessarily expected it. I thought maybe it might come in a shade to the left, but it really came in way to the left. And here's what the GFS did. If we're now into a Sunday morning, 8 a.m. This is now Monday afternoon, 2 p.m. And this is Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening. I'm sorry, this is the new one. This was the mid-cycle run, which went a little bit further to the east, okay, and kept the track basically offshore. So this was the in-between run that turns it north and northeast. But notice that at least certainly for Long Island and southeastern New England, this further east track puts that area in rain and wind. Now, I'm not convinced on that pressure. Let's go back though one more cycle, and this was the run that I came home to last night, which was quite astounding to me. And there you have it. So we're starting off with this is Saturday afternoon at the point that we start to have that northward component of motion, and it was very tucked into the coast. The center actually touched eastern Long Island and moved over southeastern New England and out. And also at this point, it's in a weakening process as it starts to orchestrate a loop back toward the southwest. And also at this point, if you look down in the lower corner, is a new tropical storm. This is one, by the way, that is generated from a tropical wave that is in the middle of the tropical Atlantic, and it's not the tropical depression that's out in the eastern Atlantic, which we'll look at in just a little bit. But this was the GFS, and the European last night sort of did the same idea. We'll take a look at that, and I want to just let me just change this. I don't like the maps with all the colors. I think they're just hard to figure out. But we'll put up this one, which is a little easier on the eyes. And I'm going to run this backwards because we're actually toward the end of the forecast period when you see it here. But you see the loop that the European orchestrates as it moves up east of the Carolinas, and then it looks like at this point it's going, it's going out to sea, and then it just flips it, loops it back westward as a weakening tropical storm and takes it into Delaware Bay, and then it's gone. And the reason why it does that is when we look at the upper air profile. Unfortunately, I would rather be able to go above the standard 18,000 feet that we look at. But if you look at the upper air, there's a weak trough that's along the east coast, whatever remnant trough is with Irma, that is just kind of hanging around. It's hard to see at this level. You can actually see it better if we jump up at the higher levels. But it's not available for the European. So that wreaks havoc. And of course, the European now is back to this idea where this big upper high is going to build up in southeastern Canada, creating a northeast flow, a flow from northeast to southwest from southern New England down into the mid-Atlantic states. And this is why the European loops this around and moves it back westward. It gets actually cradled by a big upper ridge to the north. And remember, winds around highs blow clockwise, so that turns it back over toward the west. We also are going to look at the ensembles today because I think they're important to take a look at to show you that there's still a lot of confusion as to how this is going to play out. And I want to look at the GFS ensembles. And we're going to take a look at what we call the members of this particular ensemble. Those of you who don't know what this is, you have the GFS model, which everybody sees that I already showed you. Okay, then you have different variants of the GFS model. Some have different data put in. I'm not sure what all the parameters are, but the parameters for each one of these members, and there's well over a dozen and a half of them. I'm not even sure how many there are, but each one of the members has slightly different parameters. So they run all these together, and you start to come up with results. And what happens is, as you start at the beginning, they're all clustered very close together, but as you go out through time, you start to see the variation in the model in terms of what the tracks are indicating. So we can look at the ensembles and at least get some idea of whether the run that you see, which is called the operational model, Does it make sense, or are there other members that are, maybe hinting at something else? And one of the things that the overnight ensembles did was, if you look at the concentration of where the activity is in the darker brown, these are all the different member points. Okay, you do have a cluster of them that are very close together. From southern New Jersey and off the Delaware coast. You have another cluster that's just offshore south of Long Island, east of New Jersey. And then you have a few that are out further to the east. And when we just move along through time, so this is on Wednesday, you can see there's a whole bunch of them right along the New Jersey coast. There's a whole bunch of them southeast of Long Island. So you'd kind of look at this and figure out, okay, well, where is this going to go? And you look at maybe an average position, but I'm not a big fan of doing that because I think that's just kind of, I don't know, if you use averages, you're going to get average results, and I'm trying to strive for something a bit better than average. But it's still a good thing to look at, and it certainly says at the very least that this is going to be a very close call for the Northeast. A lot is going to hinge ultimately, I think, on the upper air that we're dealing with, and I'm going to go to the higher level, and you can see the trough here a lot better on why Jose is doing what it's doing. And if you look at the area in white, this is now we're going up at 25,000 feet or higher. There's a trough that's running right down the Appalachians, and the flow along the East Coast is turning southerly up until you get about to the Delaware, New Jersey coast, and then it turns southwest. So now, of course, we're going to add the element of time to this, and that trough, kind of lines itself up and lifts this to the northeast, making for that very, very close pass. The model probably shifted a little bit to the east on the in-between run of the GFS. And you know what? This is, I want to be cautious here. This could still, after what it did last night and coming so far to the left, it could wind up, shifting back to the right. I think we're going to have a lot of back and forth to deal with over the next few days. That's why I think to unequivocally say that's, exactly what you think is going to happen here is still, it's impossible. It really is. Why don't we look at the one of the hurricane track models, the HWRF, and see what it has to say for itself? Because that's probably going to offer us yet another option. And this is the mid-cycle run. And I'll just back it up. So from the point that it goes, this is starting at Saturday morning. And then it looks like it moves straight northward from here, kind of jogs a little east or a little west here and there, and then passes very close to eastern Long Island, right over southeastern New England. So this kind of matches up with the GFS run from last night, and it also actually kind of matches up with the Canadian run from last night, which was not that far off. And you can see on the tighter view here, and we're showing you the 10-meter wind field with this. And the Canadian has a weakening system that really gets to about minimal hurricane strength, and then after it makes the pass east of the Carolinas, the pressure starts to rise. It really does not have the most aggressive wind field with it. Although on this one, by the way, the greens are 40 knots or higher, so we want to be a little careful. The gales are in the darker blues, so it does have everybody in gales. The other thing is, how it approaches the coast is going to make a difference because we do have this tidal issue next week with the new moon. So I think it'll be a good idea if you live along the coast to just be sure what time the high and low tides are, and figuring out the timing of whatever we're going to have. At the very least, we're going to have a hurricane offshore, and it's going to have some impact to our shoreline. That's going to be regardless of what the final track is. So, at least that part of the equation we seem to have figured out. Okay, so why don't we now take a look at the other things that are going on in the tropics? And I want to jump over to Tropical Depression 14. This is the new tropical depression that formed last night that is southwest of the Cabo Verde Islands. And you can see the Hurricane Center's track is to basically just take it on a course west-northwest and keep it as a tropical storm. It does not strengthen this to anything beyond that, because we actually are going to have some rather hostile conditions developing in the central tropical Atlantic for this. And that is going to probably keep this from getting to hurricane strength, although you know what, we've been sent down this road before, and we never know. And I think I got the satellite loop of this, which I do. It's just coming into view here, so I'm going to actually go take a different view, and you can see it here on the eastern tropical Atlantic view that I have. It is just southwest of the Cabo Verde Islands. It looks pretty well organized, so it won't take much for it to take another step up to a tropical storm strength. The more important wave, I think, though, to pay attention to, the tropical wave to pay attention to, is the one ahead of it. And you can see it here. It's a fairly large but still kind of disorganized area of showers and thunderstorms, but there is some sign. I'm seeing some signs that this thing might be getting its act together. And when we widen it out, we'll gain a better perspective, I believe, with a wider view. So we'll look at that. And well, first let's look at this, the visible satellite look. So you can see there's a large area of showers and thunderstorms with the wave that's in front of the tropical depression. The depression's view is just coming. The depression is just coming into view here on the southeast corner, but this is moving westward, and it's in a spot in the tropical Atlantic where conditions are going to become pretty favorable. You don't have a whole lot of shear going on. There's a little bit of it, but it's not, it's not a lot. And once it gets, I think, a little bit west of 50 west, this thing might go in a hurry. So we're going to keep an eye on this, because this could wind up developing fairly quickly as it approaches the Leeward and the northern windwards and the southern Leeward Islands. And in fact, the models do get rather aggressive with development with this as we move into early next week. So we might wind up with 3 named storms out here on the map before the weekend is done. So the tropics are really very, very busy, and you can see Jose with respect to the 2 other tropical waves that are moving. I'm sorry, the tropical wave that's moving westward, and of course the tropical depression that's out over to the east. So at least from the standpoint of the weather at the moment, and we'll put up the satellite view here, you can see from the eastern satellite view, it really isn't too much going on. The Irma remnants are there's still that little bit of troughing here in the eastern part of the United States, so that'll probably mean for some pop-up downpours this afternoon, and maybe again on Saturday, but they should be widely scattered in nature. The satellite kind of reflects what's happening in the upper atmospheres, that we have this very warm upper high that's building into the eastern part of the United States, and that is going to be the signature of the pattern going forward. So let me address you folks that are in the chat this morning. So a really big good morning to everybody, and I appreciate your patience with regards to the technical difficulty that I had earlier. So let me start this. Let me go through your question. Let's see. On we go. Tracy Reinhardt, we had a silly, mild winter, a lot of warm days. I remember thinking the ocean water temperatures might not drop as much as normal. I actually, for a while, going into the summer, ocean water temperatures were running a little bit below average, actually a little bit below average. There were a lot of other factors that play into ocean water temperatures, and some of it has to do with the weather you have, but there are a lot of other things at play. And of course, you have all sorts of currents and eddies that are moving from Greenland and from off the North Atlantic and also from the Northwest Atlantic. So for a while, ocean water temperatures were actually running a bit below average going into the summer. I really have not given it a close look. In fact, I think I still have that water temperature map up here, so we can take a look at what they are. Here we go. So here's the profile of the ocean water temperatures, and honestly, to tell you the truth, from my view, they really don't look to be that much out of whack. When I looked at it weeks ago, most of the areas were either very slightly above or very slightly below average. They don't seem to be too out of whack in terms of the actual numbers. You'll notice the cold water shelf where off the North Carolina coast, the Gulf Stream goes out to the northeast and east-northeast, and you have that shelf of colder water that runs from just north of 35 degrees north up to southern New England. So any tropical system that gets in there, unless it's moving at a very, very quick rate of speed, is going to have problems maintaining itself, while the water temperatures off the southeast coast are running at about 28 to 30 degrees Celsius, which is low to mid 80s, which is about where you would normally see it. And the water was upwelled with Irma going by and now Jose, so seeing a little bit of a cool patch there north of the Bahamas. And that's going to eventually, by the way, correct itself. It usually takes about several days to a week to just sort of normalize back to the way it was, and after the water settles. Those water temperatures there are going to be going back up early and later next week. So there's a lot of factors that go into water temperatures, and the state of the winter is not necessarily above part of it. And in fact, I'll point this out to you. We had, I believe, in 2015, with respect to start tonight with water temperatures, we had some of the coldest water temperatures on record during that winter in late February or early March. And what was really astounding was just how quickly the water warmed up when we got into June and July. It actually wound up flipping and going above normal very, very fast. And that's, again, because of other things that are happening. And the winter, the type of winter we have is just a small part of that equation. Joseph Harcourt. I live in Tampa, and I was tracking Irma very diligently. The Euro tended to do very well further out, but ultimately had the track too far west within hours of landfall. That's correct. The European was inside 72 hours, actually did not do as well as the GFS, oddly enough. The GFS had the better track once we got inside that 48 to 72-hour time frame. They weren't that far apart, but that the distance that they were apart made a huge difference in terms of the outcome for the areas down in Florida. So that's a very good point. And, we're dealing with all these variables with respect to the models, and it's kind of hard at this stage to really pick the right one because the solutions are just too varied. Christine Lundeen, Chesapeake Bay threat, Mideastern threat. We're just wondering if you think the models could begin to trend west. I certainly think they could, Christine. I don't know if I would go as far as to say that it would go into Chesapeake Bay or Delaware Bay. I think the likely outcome is that it'll be sitting somewhere offshore rather than go way to the left. But I don't want to I don't want to marry myself to that position because of what some of the overnight models do, and there are some variants that do bring it very close to those areas. So I want to be open to all possibilities. I think again the best way, if you're watching from home, thinking, okay, well, what do I do with this? I think right now we're still in this sort of wait and see mode. Because we do have some time. Just make sure that you got whatever things you need just in case you wind up losing power or something. A little bit of prepping is not necessarily a bad thing. But I'm not I'm not off the deep end at this point, and I don't think that reaction would be appropriate. We're still in the figure it out stage. It's just that we are now getting deeper into the figure it out stage. Follow up for Joseph Harcourt, somewhat unrelated, but what are your thoughts on this winter? Okay. I'll tell you what, Joe, hold that question for when we're not dealing with the hurricanes and tropical stuff, because that's kind of where my head is at right now, and I really haven't had any opportunity to look at that. When the weather calms down and there's nothing much going on, that's when I kind of start looking around at other things to see what's happening. Let's see. Do I think, Wendy Blank, do you think any of the recent weather changes that seem to be different than years past has anything to do with the iceberg that entered the ocean waters in July? Wendy, I don't know that anything really has changed. Honestly, I'm not a climatologist, and when I look at this sort of stuff from that standpoint and comment on it, I am doing it with a very sort of cursory view, because I just don't have that requires a lot of time, and you got to kind of do a lot of digging. From what I've seen and what I've read, we may have pushed the upper end of the envelope as far as that's concerned, but I don't know that things are really that different. And it's, remember, you can't look at one or two weather events or even three weather events or an entire season of weather events and say that this is something new and something different. We are all very clouded by our own experiences. We tend to remember only the things that make us happy and try not to remember the things that make us unhappy. And as a result, everybody seems to have, everybody sort of develops this clouded view of what things were like when they were younger. I'll give you a perfect example. I have people that tell me all the time that when it snowed so much more when they were growing up than what it does now. And then at that point, I point out to them that in the 70s, 80s, and 90s were the three least snowiest decades on record for where I am on Long Island anyway. And also that would apply to areas in and around New York City. That the 70s, 80s, and 90s were among the three least snowiest on record, and the 90s were the least snowiest on average. And since the year 2000, we have had an absolute bonanza when it comes to snowfall. We've had one of the snowiest, 16-year periods that we've ever seen. So, and yet I always get people saying to me, "Oh, when I grew up in the 70s, it snowed all the time." No, it didn't. Okay, unless you were way up inland, it didn't. If you grew up in the 2000s and up until through 2016, 2017 winter, it did. Okay, so again, our visions are clouded by all of this. So, plus the fact that you got to remember too, unless you're following meteorology on a day-to-day basis, you're working, you're raising a family, you're doing, you're running a business, you're doing all sorts of other things that cause you not to pay attention to weather unless an extreme develops. And then you start to think back and you say, well, I've never seen this before and I've never seen that before. That's why things seem that as if they're happening for the first time, when in reality they aren't. Can I explain why Sandy developed into such a powerful storm when it was in the cold water? Tony, what happens is a lot of as storms move up the East Coast, they begin to move outside. When they move outside of the zone of the tropics, where they gain strength through the tropical process, when they start to move north of 30 degrees north, and particularly once they move north of 35 degrees north, they begin to develop and maintain themselves through the non-tropical process. In other words, they start to react in the same way that non-tropical storms do, the ones you see in the fall and winter that move across the United States, the extratropical storms. So what happened with Sandy was it basically transitioned from a hurricane, from a truly tropical system, a system that had truly a tropical nature, that was warm core, that was stronger at the bottom of the storm and weaker as you move up to the top, to the reverse, where you have a storm that was cold core in nature, where it gets basically stronger as you go higher up in the atmosphere. And that's why Sandy was able to do what it did. It also, when they go through that change to an extratropical storm, the wind field tends to spread away from the center. In a tropical system, all the strong winds are basically near the center. Well, in a non-tropical system, usually the strong winds are well away from the center, and the wind field spreads out. So you wind up with this sort of monstrous-sized storm that covers hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles, as opposed to, you know, something that's very, very tight and tight in nature, like a tropical system is. Hello to all the latecomers. Those of you who are just jumping on board late, again, I just want to emphasize the fact that, you know, from what we see from the overnight models, it looks like we have a bit of a red flag that should go up with regards to Jose and its impacts for areas from, I'm saying, from the Delmarva Peninsula to Cape Cod, somewhere in there. Not exactly sure what is going to happen because there are too many varied tracks from different models. Every possibility from a landfall somewhere to a track just barely offshore, to a track offshore and out to sea, to a track that is offshore and does a loop and comes back, as a couple of models have done. So a lot of possibilities remain on the table here. Do I anticipate flights to the Northeast would be disrupted? Kelly, look, I'm just going to say this, and I say that I don't know what the airport and airline criteria are for this, for these sorts of things. Usually, if weather is involved, there's always some sort of disruption. So, you know, you might want to plan for a disruption of some sort, because they always do seem to happen when we have weather issues. But I don't know what the criteria are. Some places the criteria is different than others. So I think it's probably best that you check with your airline with this sort of thing, and they're usually, you know, attempting to be on top of it. Anne-Marie Charlot, the other two waves. I think the depression that's off the just southwest of the Cabo Verde Islands is probably going to wind up getting lost out there, and it's a big factor in my mind. But the wave, the tropical wave that's halfway out, to me, that I think has the potential of becoming a tropical depression or a tropical storm over the weekend, and that could have some impact in the longer term for the Leewards and possibly the Greater Antilles, and maybe beyond that. We'll have to start to look at things with the way the weather pattern is setting up into the east. This thing that might wind up having a pretty long westward trajectory. Okay, David Foreman, you asked the important question. Favorite cigar for me, it's the La Flor Dominica 700 Maduro. That is my go-to cigar. I really enjoy that very much. I don't have a large number of cigars that I switch off to. I usually try to stay with that one. If I don't have that around and I need options, I sometimes go to a Perdomo. I like a 60 ring gauge, so I'll go to a Perdomo. Occasionally I will smoke Olivas, and I'm just trying to think. I've tried a few others. Everybody's kind of raving about the Asylum. I tried that. I wasn't too crazy about it. Those are probably, I have a very kind of narrow scope. I'll try different ones, but you always seem to come back to the same ones at the end. Serena Duval, regardless of where the track is for Jose, could the New Jersey coast have issues with waves and flooding? Yes, absolutely. And no apologies necessary, by the way. Absolutely. I think, with respect to the coastal waters, we are going to have some tidal flooding issues. We do have a new moon coming up next week, so this does not come up at a good time. So that could be, at the end, that may wind up being the biggest concern out of everything. By the way, I should also point out too, but given all the tracks, there aren't any tracks that I saw that take this straight inland and north. So the effects may wind up being confined from to the immediate coast and diminishing considerably as you go inland. So I want everybody to remember that. Again, I'm not seeing, this is not a case of something going inland and then shooting, up through New England and upstate New York. It would seem to me that the impacts here are going to be confined to the immediate coastline. And Michael Kufield, it's the La Flor Dominica 700 Maduro. Okay, LFD is LFD for short. La Flor Dominica 700 Maduro. And I got a cigar question, so that's wonderfully off topic. Cigar and fishing. Connor Degnan, watching from England, very informative. Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. I love when we get these folks coming on. Ben McGinnis, Nova Scotia impact. Okay, Ben, that's going to really depend on whether we have a straight offshore solution. If it winds up getting kicked out to the northeast, then you could have an impact to Nova Scotia, but not all the models do that, and there's a possibility that it could wind up passing well to the south of Nova Scotia if it turns, more east, northeast, or east, which is a possibility given how the upper air is structured. But I would kind of pay attention, though. If you're up in Nova Scotia or Newfoundland, might not be a bad idea to pay a little closer attention. Raymond, I'm heading to Lake Ontario. I'm going up for my fishing trip. I'm going up toward Lake Ontario, and I'm going to be fishing the tribs up there. Serena Duval, you want to know if you'd be prepared for a Sandy type impact. Well, when we come, just remember, Sandy, Serena, when we say Sandy, an image comes up, and that was kind of an extreme impact there. But you know what? The threat for some coastal flooding and track's going to make a huge difference for New Jersey in particular, because if it winds up staying offshore, you're going to have a north wind. That's going to seriously lessen your tidal concerns. So you want an offshore track that stays offshore to your east so that the wind goes around from the east to the north. That will lessen your tidal flooding issues. Okay, what you don't want is something that comes into Delaware Bay or into southern New Jersey. Oh, that would have a completely different impact. And yes, Ben McInnes, the tracks are kind of shifting around and changing with every model run. So we're going to be, this is going to be a hair-pulling event for quite a while here. There's still a lot of possibilities on how this all could wind up playing out. We are, at the beginning of this. And hey, I really hope it goes out to sea. It would be so much easier for everybody involved that if it just makes a close call, kicks up the ocean, and goes out to sea where the impacts are minor. That's what I want to have happen. That's a far less of a headache for me to deal with from a forecast standpoint. So let's hope that that's what it does. Steve Addy, will it do something significant to get to the UK? Yeah, you know what? That's such a long-term question, Steve, and I don't see how. Right now, I'm not really kind of looking at that. But from what I gave it from a cursory glance, this didn't look like something that moves all the way across. Especially with the loop, it may just loop around, fall apart, and die. So I would say that the odds of it getting, hooking up and going all the way across right now doesn't appear too likely. Tracy Reinhardt found it out of frustration of the channel. It's impossible to visit any news for info without them making you watch multiple commercials first. Well, you know what, Tracy? I mean, I do have, to be fair, I do have ads that run here, so because I got to earn a living somehow. But I try to keep them to a minimum, and I appreciate your being here. And of course, at least here, where else can you have somebody sit for an hour and talk about one specific weather event for one particular area? And you folks seem to enjoy having a conversation about this, and I certainly do. So I appreciate that all of you are here. Is the Navy track model still bringing it onto Long Island and inland? You know what? I didn't even look at that. Once upon a time, folks, we only had one model. And And now that we have 101 models, I find it very hard. It's just to watch all, to be able to look at all these things all at the same time is so difficult. Let's see. So the Navy model, or we used to call the no gaps model, or we used to call it the no craps model. Actually, it brings it to Cape May as a weakening hurricane to a tropical storm. So, that's the Navy NavGem solution. And before anyone asks, might as well look at the Japanese model, which has it going well out to sea and not even a bother to just about anyone. So those are the other two outlier solutions here going into the long term. What I really do like about you folks that are on here, by the way, is the fact that you do at least have an understanding of how weather works, and I'm not dealing with people that make, for the most part, that make, silly statements about forecasting and people's inability to be able to forecast, and, standing around complaining that they're not getting certitude over, something that's 3, 4, 5 days in advance. You folks all seem to have a good idea of what this process is about, and and I appreciate that very much. All right, folks, gonna cut it now, and we'll I'm gonna try and do a live stream tonight earlier, perhaps later this evening. It depends on what my time schedule is, but I think I might be able to do this. So I'll try to do a live stream later this evening. So just check on my YouTube channel page. I'll put up a time a little early this afternoon when I get into work and I figure out how my work schedule is going to play out. And once again, thank you to all of you who've been here, who have occasionally hit the super chat button. I really appreciate that, or my PayPal. I really appreciate that too. Very much. It lets me buy a cigar and a beer every once in a while, and I'll have something to relax with after all this is over. All right, have a great day, folks. Again, pay attention to also website posts on my website, meteorologistjoecioffi.com, and you can also find me on Facebook at Meteorologist Joe Cioffi.